I think everybody's here. I'm Randy Prince, the chair for today's meeting. This is the April 3rd, 2012 meeting of the Gene Toxics Board. We're going to start right off by welcoming our new member, Nicole.
Yeah. No way.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
We're glad to have you here. I said I'm Randy Prince. I'm one of the public advocates and serving as chair for the next month or two or three. And down here, we're going around and introducing ourselves.
Sheena Gardner, industrial rep with Willamette Valley Company.
Stephen Flanagan, I'm the neutral member of the board.
John Carmichael, industrial.
And then next recorder, Joe Epley, staff.
Okay. We will go on to our agenda prepared by Joe, which starts off after this item with public comment. Many members of the public that want to comment. Approval of our official minutes from February 8th, the last meeting. Next item is the staff report from Joe.
Did we just jump by? Can I say something, or was that my?
No, I'm just recounting the agenda. You're welcome to. Then the major item with 30 minutes allocated is a presentation by Dr. Steve Johnson, who's here, one of the advocates for the medicinal law, and he's going to report on the history of this program and pesticides reporting. The next item scheduled on the agenda is an update on the reporting from companies during this year, 2012. That's a 15-minute item. Then the next item is an update on our membership and where that stands, also a 15-minute item. And the final item that is scheduled is what will we do in the future, including the discussions with Lane County Emergency Planning Committee, a 5-minute item. All it totals 90 minutes. Keeping this here till about 5. Does anybody have any comment or want to say about the agenda? Yes.
In honor of Dr. Johnson's time, we can move staff report to after this presentation.
Everybody's agreeable with that. We'll modify the agenda just by that one item.
And you're welcome to stick around.
And it's okay if I go.
Yes, you can.
All right, so we'll just switch item 5 and 6 around. Otherwise, it seems everybody is approving of the agenda. And we'll go on to the next item, which is public comment. I heard that we do have some public comment.
A couple items, and I think I sent an email, Andy Pointer, I sent an email to Joe a couple weeks ago, I don't know. And the two items I cited were the metals reporting that companies are doing and inconsistencies. And the second item is a new software, why it has to go to 9 zeros past the 0 when it says in the charter that you only need to report to 2. Because when you're filling it in, you see if it's off by 3 places, it will show that 9 digits out there, and which is somewhat disconcerting when you're trying to complete it and move on to the next one. So why do we have all those zeros in there? Any clue? And can we fix that?
The program is still in the process of being refined.
So that'd be neat if we could confine it to the 2 places.
Without a rounding function.
It would
Just
seem
give
like
me
that.
2 places. Give me 2 places.
It would seem like that would be perfunctory. That's just a programming issue.
Yeah, but for filling it out, it's frustrating.
Yeah, no, that seems ridiculous. Really.
7 times later, I can tell you, very frustrating.
Yeah.
The second item has to do with metals and how the toxics group decided to report the constituents manganese, chromium, copper, nickel in the reporting. Some of you may be aware that the magical formula was to take the scrap report and take 5% of that volume, and the percentages of manganese 2%, copper, chromium, nickel being 1%, and reporting those values. And that shows the usage of those metals for those facilities, which may be great for the Toxics Board, but is somewhat inconsistent with what the EPA requires when companies have to report their processing of metals through a facility and reporting of those 4 metals you get very different values. What's happening now is LRAPA and EPA and other agencies are looking at the Toxics Board numbers online and comparing and going, well, what's that about? Or how did that get there? Why is that more different? And so we have inconsistencies, and it would be probably wise to look at some way down the road of making them the same.
Could you clarify what you mean by scrap?
What goes to Snitzer, specific recycling.
Total volume of all metals scrapped by the company,
Yep,
and so they just estimate
5% of that, and that's what becomes the percentages of manganese, copper, chromium.
you mean that 5% then is also broken into estimated
The percentage of
some
those.
presumption?
Yep. And that was to get at dust, fumes, filings, grindings, which was a magical
And so the
idea.
manganese and chrome, that these are for steel, for ferrous metals.
And copper and nickel.
But all companies that are scrapping metal are presumed to have the same level of, because of, if it's.
Well, with the toxic boards, you just take 5% of that scrap value and report that as the values of those constituent metals.
Because it'd be hard to.
Well, nobody had the equipment to measure dust, fumes, filings, grindings. And
What
it was
about
just-
what about a footnote that that data is based on estimates?
That
rather
would,
than-
well, I was just saying that it's not the way the EPA does it, and when we show the reporting these metals, and you've got two different numbers, it's like, well, how did they come up with that?
Right, but what I'm saying, as a matter of accuracy, if we footnoted that this data is based on estimates.
That would help, at least
of
shows
volume.
it's a totally different number.
Right, but I think the first thing we'd have to verify is that that's actually what everybody's doing, so I don't.
Well, yeah, that's another point, is who is reporting metals, who's not, and what percentage, so.
Right.
Because there's a lot of steel fabricators in the mix there, and they're not all doing the same.
Yeah, so I guess, so that there's two parts to that
Yeah.
question, right? One is, some are estimating, it's what you're doing. The other is everyone else doing that? So we can't really footnote.
Well, the
something
estimating was a product of the Toxics Board saying, do it this way.
at some point in history.
Yeah, way
Okay,
back,
so,
15 years.
so Joe, it seemed like we need to kind of tease that out and find out how people are doing that, and then whether or not we need to make some sort of an addendum to the data to say, this is how we're generating it, because that would at least clarify the EPA or anyone else looking at the data that it's generated this way.
It's different.
Right. Well, then that makes sense, so.
How would we know? I mean, I think in Eugene, we don't have a metal manufacturer like Watching or somebody like that that's reporting. I mean, how would we? It seems like we want a different reporting system for somebody who is drilling metal and has shavings and microscopic amounts of vaporized versus other places where there's hot processes and things.
EPA just says if you cut, bend, grind, breathe on the metal, it counts.
Okay.
So if you modify it in any way, shape, or form, that's that article definition that some of us may remember. If you change the shape or design or composition or anything to them, then it counts. And you count that total weight of that metal as being processed through the facility. To trip the thresholds for EPA, you have to process more than 2,500,000 pounds of steel a year. And that trips the 2% threshold for manganese, which is 25,000 pounds, and that is 1% for copper, chrome, nickel.
We have a lower threshold, much lower.
But there's a lot of companies out there that are moving that much metal easily. That's 2.5 million pounds of steel through a facility in a year. Turns out not to be that much. What's a truck carry? 30,000 pounds?
48.
Yeah, and then how many trucks a week?
40 to 50.
And how many trucks a week type thing, so it adds up quickly.
Well, my concern is, I mean, I see the problem there, but I mean, mostly what we're getting reports from are people are fabricating or those activities you mentioned. But if we did ever have a metal,
Steel mill?
yeah, or like, you know, an exotic metals, you know, the possibility of airborne.
This is steel. All workers are
What?
It's just the steel.
Steel is the only thing that's on our list.
Okay. And that also then drives the rod and wire that's used as well as steel, because the same constituents are in the rod and wire.
So there could be, for example, items in Albany that come off of the plant there that makes exotic metal products that would not be covered.
You're talking about the titanium mill and all that?
Things like that, yeah.
Yeah.
They would not be reporting.
You're comparing apples and oranges. Yeah.
I know, they're not here.
Yeah. I mean, there's a steel mill in McMinnville, but that's got nothing to do with Gene.
Are there any other questions for our public commenter?
I just want to clarify, so I'm going to look into who is reporting metals and how, and bring that back to the toxics board to discuss whether we need to add a footnote or not into the, onto the website at least, saying these are based on estimates.
Yeah, it seems like a good course.
We have, as usual, our detailed minutes. Moving on in the agenda. You did public.
I'm okay.
There's no other comment there. Other public is presented. Minutes from our meeting in February. 2 seconds to refresh your memory if you saw anything that was at your attention or needed correction.
Do I have one of those? Guess I do now. Thank you. I probably do in that package you gave.
Well, this was in a separate one sent via email
Oh, I have that.
last week.
I don't have any additions.
You're okay? Okay. All right, hearing no objection to the minutes as presented. We'll go on to our feature event for the day. No, maybe we won't. I'm looking at this. Yes, we will. Steve Johnson, part of the original effort to put this in, correct?
That's correct.
Yeah.
Do you want me to sit up at the table? Or?
Yeah,
Sure.
come on.
All right.
Yeah.
I'll be wherever you guys, wherever you like. Plenty of seats. Before I start, I think on the metal thing you guys were just talking about, if someone came here and started to actual production of a metal, then they would just be bound by what raw materials they were bringing in if they were on the reporting lists, and you wouldn't have the same issue at all unless there were also fabrication issues. So it would depend, and titanium itself probably isn't on the list, but the ore itself might have other things that would be in it, like radioactive byproducts and so on. They have a whole chain. But anyway, I'm sure you guys have figured all that out.
So Steve, why don't you give us your professional background first, and then just the history of the board, and probably questions as we go.
Okay, well, most of my professional career, sort of I guess I've done sort of three things. I worked at the University of Oregon for about 15 years, mostly teaching in political science, or at one point running a public opinion survey center that they had. I also have worked for about 20 years at a place called Decision Research, where we study human judgment and decision making. And then I've owned a private company with 50 employees where we gathered data for public opinion. So that's kind of been my career now. I'm down to sort of a smaller consulting business. And as was mentioned a couple times, I was one of the two original chief petitioners, as they're called, for the charter amendment that created the Toxics Board and the Toxics Right to Know Act. I also served on the board for a total of 11 years, 5 years one time and 6 years another time. And during those first years is when we created a lot of the implementing stuff, probably including what was referred to about how to deal with metal filings and shavings and so on. So I was around that for a long time, both in terms of what we were trying to accomplish with the law, how we tried to put it into motion, and then for quite a period of time in just carrying out the kind of annual schedule that you guys now enjoy of reporting and looking to see, and dealing with someone who reports late or something like that. But I think I probably don't have anywhere near 30 minutes worth of stuff to say. But a couple things that in talking with Stephen about current things at the board that strike me as kind of interesting. One is sort of the original intent. Now, mind you, this isn't a constitutional issue, an original intent. The law is what the law is. And, you know, what we might have intended, to the extent we were successful at implementing it, then it is what we intended. If we failed to implement it, then, you know, still the law is what the law is. But the original impetus for anyone getting involved in this was concern over a company that no longer is in Eugene, Hyundai, later Hynix, and there was some environmental concerns raised at the time, and some people were concerned about was there anything that could be done at the city level to, you know, to regulate a manufacturer like that. And I and other people thought that regulation was probably, one, outside the scope of what the city had the legal authority to do, two, very, very difficult to do, and three, probably politically unfeasible as well, because there are lots and lots of regulators, and how do you fit into that? So I guess I'm the one, I came up with the idea that instead of trying to do a regulatory schema of some sort, which I thought would be extremely difficult in all kinds of ways, that a much simpler and relatively useful thing to do would be to require reporting of the use of toxic materials. That on the theory that if there is something to be concerned about, reporting will make that evident. And so if something comes up that is a concern, if you have good reporting, then people can raise that concern. And if local agencies and state and federal regulators can't deal with it, then there will be some movement to try and deal with whatever toxic issue is raised. But first you have to know that the problem exists. So rather than hearsay, what we wanted to create was as accurate a source of information as we could about the use of toxic materials, and in particular, any releases to the environment of toxic materials. Some of us thought that it would have some other benefits. I thought that if companies did this kind of reporting, they might actually reduce their use of toxic materials, because toxic materials are not cheap, they're expensive. And so you want to use them as efficiently as you can. And so if reporting showed inefficiency of use, excess amounts going to waste or being released, then there would be some incentive, both in terms of perhaps political pressure, but also just an economic incentive to try and do better with those toxic materials. That you don't want to just throw these things away, you want to use them as efficiently as you can. And later, some companies would say to me, usually quietly, that they thought that some of that had actually happened. At one time I thought that Hyundai was actually going to say something like that publicly. I'm not sure if they ever did before they closed their door. That the law had been a kind of unintended benefit to them. Other issues that came up when we talked about doing this is, well, how are we going to decide what's toxic? And clearly it was beyond our ability to make actual scientific decisions about whether or not a material is toxic. But as you're all very well aware, the federal government has done that and created this series of lists that we then incorporate into the law. And the list would be the arbiters of whether or not something was toxic. And those lists, as they have been updated and changed, I was involved once when the list updated of us incorporating that into taking the notion that as the list changed, the toxic law would be updated to incorporate anything that was added to the list or to remove anything that dropped out. That would always try and stay current with the federal lists. And I think each time that occurred when I was on the board, it required a small act on the part of City Council to modify some ordinance around this so that it was possible to do that. So we tried to have something that would, one, keep up with what was happening, two, would not put us in the spot of trying to say whether or not something was toxic or extremely hazardous or anything like that. And so we kind of followed that. We also somewhat purposefully excluded pesticides from the law because they had strict controls. We thought, one, there were other organizations involved in them, and we were primarily trying to concern ourselves with the manufacturer. If you came in here and you manufactured pesticides, I think you would fall under the law if you were the right SEC codes. The use of pesticides we saw as a separate issue. And so we purposely had taken that out, whether it was just purely thinking we didn't want to make the law more confusing because you have to actually get voters to approve these things, might have been a small factor in it, although I think we weren't so worried about the law passing. but we didn't see it as our purview to get outside of the realm of production, which is what we've been concerned with. And so, although later issues came up over cleaning solvents and things like that, we purposely had excluded pesticides from it when we did it. And I think Mary O'Brien probably pushed for that more strongly than anyone else as a reasonable thing to exclude. The other issue that in the years I was on the board would occasionally come up, we would get visitors who would come and be upset that we didn't have some form of regulatory power, that we were unable to say to someone, well, you can only use X amount of this or Y amount of that. And it was never our intention to try and make it a regulatory regime for the reasons I mentioned earlier. But often people would come and think that it had some of those properties. And I always sympathized with the cases people brought forward, but that's really a different kettle of fish. And the closest thing we come to that, at least in the version of air, at least as it deals with air, is LARAPA, which has limited regulatory power. So that's sort of my take on the history and my involvement with it. I would say that trying to write the law initially was extremely difficult. Mary and I wrote it ourselves, and you can't imagine how bad it was compared to what we have now. And then we brought in people who were experts at ordinance construction, who had worked in city governments, mostly attorneys, who had produced ordinances and or statutes and understood the things that had to go into ordinances to actually make them kind of work. And one thing I was pleased with, that there really was very little of any legal argument raised that the ordinance was something the city couldn't do or couldn't enact, or that the language was vague or misleading. And I think that's a large extent because we realized that where our limitation was and brought in really pretty good experts to help us to do that. And then I also think that the board itself did an incredible job the first couple of years of trying to work all of these things out. And I do remember a very long process I went through with a board member who at that time served as an industry representative from Molecular Pros, where he and I tried to figure out what we needed in terms of enabling language to deal with radioactive materials, which has lots of tricks attached to it. And I think we worked out something that has worked, might be the reason the most limited amount in Eugene, but I think it's worked pretty well. And Molecular Probes have the greatest interest in trying to do that since they use radioactive test isotopes. Although hospitals, if they're covered by the law, they have some of the same issues. One thing that may happen on the horizon, the potential is out there now in the not so distant future for hospitals to start to produce some of their own radioactive isotopes. There's I think, I could be wrong here, but I think on the not so far horizon, we're going to see relatively small fusion reactor capable of producing hospital isotopes. That's what we'll do. The reactors themselves have now been developed. That's what they're being, at least in the test bed, and that's what they're being developed for. Because those isotopes have such short half-lives that getting them to a hospital in time to use them is an enormous difficulty. And there are very few places that produce them. So we may start to see some of that. And if so, that's a form of manufacturing that you start to engage in. And so the hospitals, if they do move that, of course we only have one hospital in Eugene that would ever be of a scale that would do that, then it would have to start listing itself under that manufacturing SEC code as one of its SEC codes of operation. And it would then probably come under the Toxic Waste Control just for those things it manufactures. And that's sort of what, the extent, I assume most of you know kind of most of this history, but to the extent I had anything to say, that was sort of it. I thought there might be questions, and so if anybody had a question, I would do the best to answer. Realize, you're getting my biases and my history and my perspective on this. Others aren't here to speak for themselves.
What, as far as the choice of only covering manufacturers looking at product, do you have an impression of how much toxic chemicals are utilized in the manufacturing sector versus the service sector, and releases we don't know? Yeah,
I am sure that when you get to airborne releases, some service sectors like painting would release enormous amounts when you think of all the small painters, and you add them all together. I mean, the use of particularly solvents and, you know, in service has to be huge. On the other hand, a lot of the toxic materials you guys have reporting on are really only used in manufacturing. When you take a look at the tens of thousands of chemicals used in manufacturing, the ones used in service is going to be a small set of that, I suspect. But I also suspect they have a lot less control, and they're much more likely to be released to air and maybe even to waste and water.
Oh,
And so I think it's an issue.
the railroad produced a lot of pollution. And I take it that was judged to be a service activity, or that it just was in the past. And they weren't excluded because of their federal railroad status. It was just because that's the service to the railroad, the railroad yard.
Yeah. And that whole transportation sector, I mean, if you think of it, if you think of service broadly, the other large form of pollution used in service and transportation is just from combustion. And almost all of that's air pollution. So I suspect that, well, if you take a look at automotive air pollution and in what part is industry and what part's private ownership, you know, those numbers are pretty readily available. And industry does use a fair amount of it. I mean, FedEx, 2.5 billion gallons a year of fuel. So,
Well, it seems like this problem has been corrected now. Some work on the plume on the ground. It reminds me of a report I heard about back east, the mysterious plume on the MBTE. That eventually was traced to a tannery or something. So that would have been a manufacturer, but the similar chemical used to clean something was already made would be a service operation.
right, and so it kind of, I mean, it does vary. I mean, there's also mining, for that matter, too. I mean, in some parts of the world, mining produces significant, particularly beach mining, produces significant pollution.
Yeah.
So you can find lots of polluters out there, and I'm all for knowing more about them and reporting on them. But you have to kind of pick your battles and make a case. And you know, we picked what was the concern at that time, and those concerns, you know, the railroad yard wasn't a concern at that time, and would have probably had a different political action group interested in it. One thing I do think, though, that this has shown is that people are very supportive, I suspect, of reporting still today. And if someone wanted to try and make an additional ordinance that had to do with reporting of other business sectors, I don't suspect that's an impossible task. But it is, it requires someone, an interest group, and a lot of effort to do that. But it might well be something. Our concerns and interests and fears of toxics are not going to go away. They're not going to get smaller in the future, I don't think. If anything, they're going to get larger. So one would expect that Eugene law, first, no law is going to do everything for everybody, and it doesn't mean that there couldn't be additional things done.
Are there any areas where the information provided by the law would interest the public enough to actually ask the city to be a regulatory agency, or are they in general excluded, preempted by higher bodies from any regulatory role?
I don't know if it's any, but I think other than health and safety regulations, where you might have some latitude, mostly fire marshal-like things, but even there they follow a uniform code, if I understand pretty much. But I think outside of those areas, I don't think, and maybe that Ken or Andy know more about this, or someone else at the table, I suspect the city's pretty limited in what it can do on that. It may not be powerless, however. I'm not saying that it's powerless, but I think you're going to find that a lot of things like railroad and the interstate freeway, general use of automobiles and those sorts of things are going to be beyond the regulatory power of the city, in the sense that it's going to try and regulate with pollution.
So it's still empower the citizens might be able to address the appropriate regulatory agencies if they have the information and ask for action.
And I think the state would have, when you get to the level of the state, then you have a whole different set of powers. I mean, we have considerable air pollution authority power in the state, at the state level. And the state EPA struggle with these kinds of things. But at the state level, one can probably do quite a bit. But that becomes, you know, a much bigger political arena to work in. Also opens it up to enormous amounts of money spent on the other side.
Are there any situations elsewhere in the state where you think of pollution that might have not occurred had there been a better reporting like this city? You know, I mentioned that case I saw on TV thing of the plume of underground pollution.
Yeah, well, one would think that is, you know, you kind of hope that as some of the technology, like the early chip manufacturing technology had enormous amounts of groundwater pollution. And then they started to build plants that were more containment vessel-like. And that concern largely vanished. If you take a look, Tadek is a friend of mine, a college office mate, John Markov's book, Adhikasa High Tech, which is about 15 years ago. He's a reporter for the New York Times still today. If you look at his book, at that time there were enormous, chip manufacturing had enormous pollution attached to it initially, and most of that was taken pretty well under control. If you go back and look at the reporting on what Hyundai actually released, it's amazingly small given the volumes that they dealt with. And you'd probably be surprised. Where if you take a look at the plants that were a decade before that, they were terrible. So, you know, one question is always, sure, lots of plants were polluting in the past. Would a current plant built today have that same problem? And, you know, I don't know the answer to that. It needs a different kind of expert than me to know that.
Jeff, something to see.
Yeah.
In that period, the Uniform Fire Code came through with Article 80, hazardous materials. And it was in that window about 18 years ago that it was right in the construction of Hyundai. So it was right before they were already permitted, but they hadn't been operational. And Article 80 came through, and they had to literally go back to the drawing table and redesign the plant to conform to all the new Uniform Fire Code regulations that dealt with the storage, the containment, and handling of hazardous materials. And it was a huge cost because all designers were caught off guard with the new specs, the architects, and it just rippled through. So it delayed the construction and also changed the design of the ultimate facility significantly.
I took a tour a few years ago of a plant under construction at Intel, and the amount of containment effort and control technology to control these things was stunning. I mean, sort of mind-boggling. I mean, if you're a science fiction fan and you've seen science fiction things with spaceships, well, this thing's far beyond that. To go climb through the bowels of one of those plants, just mind-boggling. So, you know, I don't know the answer to that. I mean, obviously at one level the answer is yes. There's things we could have done better in the past. But any other question?
Would you say that there's more, would you agree that there's more release of potentially harmful toxics from businesses that are not covered by the ordinance?
I don't know if that's true or not. I suspect there probably are, just because of the numbers of small service businesses. I mean, we're more a service. There's a little bit of a thing. Well, American manufacturing has been growing every year for a very long time. It grows among the top 10 of all countries in the world. But it's a much more large-scale and automated kind of manufacturing. But the number of people working in service industries far exceeds the number of people working in manufacturing, and will continue that way. And so I suspect that those potentials for pollution will remain huge. And given the scale of a lot of them, they're very hard, you know, very burdensome for people in many ways to deal with. It really requires not only regulation, but education and a lot of things to deal with that. And some things, population grows, you know, volatile chemicals being released from painting just requires improvements in paint technology more than anything can be done on the part of the painters. You can improve the technology of the paints that we use. So,
Steve, you implied that manufacturing is growing here.
I don't know if it's growing in Eugene or not. It's sure growing in the United States.
Well, certainly not here. We've lost half the companies that we used to.
But it's a total volume. Manufacturing is measured by the value of output.
We're back in China.
Manufacturing is growing in China, but the United States, literally for the last 20 years, has always been in the top 10 in growth in manufacturing year after year. And we are still significantly larger manufacturer than China.
I mean, the Talks Board is Eugene, and that's
Yeah.
what we're concerned about. And so,
Sure.
and what's happened here is quite the opposite. It's the reversal. We've lost companies, we've lost manufacturing. We're definitely using less chemical than we used to.
Yeah, so I was looking at that. We use less. Actually, most companies that report a great number of them are using less chemicals than they used. If you take a look at the little graphs you can do by each company, a lot of them are in slight decline. Sometimes precipitous decline. In 2008 and 9, you can see some serious declines too, which were probably from the economy. So, but manufacturing has always done it. It's always moved around the country and left ghost towns behind. I mean, boy, you go to the Rust Belt and you can see some incredible things that, the changes that have happened from that. So, manufacturing has become a very automated, capital-intensive, much less labor-intensive industry.
Is the wafer board plant on, in the bow, in the city limits, are they reporting?
What was that?
The plant out in Danebo, is on Danebo or Cherry?
Wafer board?
The particle board, wafer board?
There's no wafer board.
Flipboard?
Yeah,
Weyerhaeuser?
Yeah,
Particle board
Weyerhaeuser,
plant?
Willamette, and Weyerhaeuser, yeah. Are they in the city limits, or are they
Yeah.
reporting?
Yes.
Yeah.
And typically, those are big solvent users, but those things are glued.
I had somebody telling me who bicycles by their waves and so on.
But anyway, it's sort of, I hope this is of some value to you. But I appreciate the service everyone's doing here, by the way. Tough duty. I'm glad you're all stepping up to do it.
Thank you very much.
Great, thanks, Steve.
Okay, then any other comments or questions? I'll take care. Our next agenda item is Joe's staff report.
Okay, I don't know. Can you find it?
Oh, yeah, I'm in here.
Oh, yeah, okay. I don't know how many of you had a chance to look at the website since our last meeting, but the aggressive survey has been removed as requested, so I find that very exciting. And when we launch the new website, which is scheduled for the new City of Eugene website, which is scheduled for the middle of May to the beginning of June, on the new Toxics program website, we're going to have a feedback comment form instead, which is optional, but it'll stand out so that if they have something useful to say, they can go to that option and submit something in. I am still working with Central Services on getting a good report on the number of hits to the Toxics program website, as well as the domains from which they came. There's a number of issues that have been barricading me from making any progress on this request. First of all, the Toxics website is, and this is technical lingo, so hopefully it'll make sense because that's not my area of expertise. The Toxics program website is based on an application, which is the database from all the reports from the companies in the program. And so that makes it more challenging to find where the hits to the website are coming from. And the program that the city currently uses to track website hits is just kind of very simplistic. So fortunately, the good news is that there's other free applications available out there, and I've had my information technology staff set that up, but it was only last week that we put that in place, because also at Central Services Information Technology Department, we've had a change in staff. So kind of midway from last meeting to today, we have a new staff person that kind of does IT work for the Toxics program. So she's been scurrying to learn as much as she can, as quickly as she can, about all the programs that the Toxics board uses to function, as well as the fire department stuff. So she's been really busy working as fast as she can. So by next meeting, I will have some data for you. I had her set up, it's called Google Analytics, to kind of track hits to at least the main pages. And then we're looking into options with the new toxic, the new City of Eugene website, if there's any way we can do a better tracking. Because this information that they printed out for me was not acceptable, so.
Doesn't tell you anything.
Exactly.
What are the community pages? Community pages of what?
Well, this is for, I mean, it's basically a useless report. This is with what the city currently uses to track, you know, people visiting the website. These are the results they were able to print out for me for the toxics.
Only the last few pages tell you anything. It tells you that there were 6,000 views in the first 6 months.
How did they come to, I just wanted to know what they talk about community pages. Is that a portion of the City of Eugene's website that is intended for the public to access?
No.
Is it the front of the phone book? What is it?
No, it's just this webtrends.com is what the city uses to track website usage.
Okay.
And that is their term for bringing out this type of information.
It looks like they just did a query on the word toxic within the city's pages, and they came up with some numbers, but those numbers don't even match what's in the back 2 pages. So, I mean, yeah.
So anyway, I thought it was a very useless report, and I wasn't happy with it, so I asked them to put something else in place. And just because of staff changes, I can't have anything better for you today, but I'm working on it.
It has a ranking for the fire marshal's office. Is that a city fire marshal?
Yes, because the toxics program by the charter is housed underneath the fire marshal's office.
Overall rank of 99.
Well, Randy, I didn't put a lot of time
Oh.
in learning what all this means because I didn't.
It's useless.
Okay.
I
All right,
didn't
so
feel
it's
it.
sort
It
of
was
scratch paper or
what we
something.
were
Yes.
looking at.
I
Okay.
can't read it anyway.
You can even use my glasses.
I don't think I could even read them with your glasses.
Okay.
So I apologize about the delay on that, but still working on it.
Like useless on here.
Yeah, I should have put that in bold.
Please disregard.
Yeah. Did not have a chance to do any site visits since the last meeting. Did perform a couple of audits before the 1st of March came along because per board policy, since it's the month of reporting, I don't do any audits of the reports within the month of March. So my regular report schedule will resume probably next week. I received a call from Beyond Toxic Staff, which is formerly known as the Oregon Toxics Alliance, and that's who Allison works for. And they just want to use some of the information from our website and our program on their website. And they were specifically asking for output total of all facilities. And since when they made the call, we were in the middle of reporting for 2011, I gave them the number for 2010. And I just thought the board would like to know when I receive those type of inquiries, that other people are actually using our information.
It's interesting that they ask, since it's public information and they don't need our permission to.
Yeah, well, I think more of the issue was that on the city's challenging website, they couldn't find it, even though it
Oh, I see. So they were asking you for a more direct source to the information.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
fine.
because they wanted to report accurately, but they
Yeah.
weren't able to find it on their own.
Well, that's great. If you were to ask the right person.
Would other people know how to ask a follow-up question if they had trouble? From our website. It says if you need additional information, contact Joe Epley.
Well, it doesn't say exactly that, but
It does say something.
yeah, it has my phone number, and then you can send an email to Eugene Toxics Board, which is actually a second inbox that I monitor. And that's it for the staff report.
Any other comments or questions on the staff report?
I don't know how rigid you guys are, but there was one other thought I wanted to bring up with gases.
Well, I was gonna ask you about that.
Yeah, and you mentioned it earlier, but there's inconsistency out there about the reporting of gases, and we should address that at some point. And whether it be propane or argon or whatever.
Oxygen is not.
Oxygen, another. Calling them toxics is a stretch, and then having a flash point to define them is totally a misapplication. The flashing points deal with liquids.
Yeah, I kind of felt that overlap with fire marshals.
Well, regardless, I'm just saying
No,
that
it's for
it's just a lot of
caution.
confusion.
Yeah.
And I'll give you a classic example. There's companies like Force Paint out there that report. You'll notice they don't report their gases. They have 6 containers of isobutane on their property, which is reported to the risk management program annually. That's an EPA-based program that says if you have certain chemicals in large quantities, you have to report it. And so they've done worst-case scenarios and determined what the blast zone would be in 1 tank, when 6 tanks would be a whole other order of magnitude. They're not reported on the toxics. So you go, well, wait a minute. Yeah, you got other people who are doing welding reporting their setting.
I was interested in the auditing procedure that you mentioned. What is an audit consist of? To see that the report is not only accurate, but yeah, I mean, includes all of the necessary items.
Well, the argument, Randy, may not be required. That's the point. See, some are saying, I don't see where it says I have to do this. So others interpret it differently. And some people put a setting on the list, so, oh, I report that now. Yeah.
So I would need direction from Toxics Board on what you're likely to do with that information.
Well, first, yeah, I mean, when you do an audit, what does that consist of?
I look at where a lot of errors regularly occur is discrepancy between year-end inventory of 1 year and beginning year inventory of the next, which is required by our program. And then I look at the total input and output chart, and if sometimes some number just like really stands out, like that is not in the right place, so I do further investigation onto that. And for right now, that's how I've been instructed to do as far as my audits. But that can change for board policy.
I'm sorry if I've forgotten. We were working from a list of specified chemicals or categories.
Well, it's in the charter, and I don't have it memorized, but it's basically the U.S. code.
No, the list of chemicals came from another number of areas.
But the federal
Yeah, EPA
regulatory.
and list, but a lot of things that were added into the toxics list were subsequently done by local people who said, well, I'm supposed to report this, and so that got put into the list without any review whatsoever. And a lot of other chemicals got put in with the wrong CAS numbers, and so there's chemicals, I could probably find at least a half a dozen out of the list in Eugene that don't even exist. So there's a lot of
Sorry, the CAS number or the compound?
the CAS numbers.
So,
The CAS numbers
so
were
inaccurate CAS numbers associated with a compound.
NAP solvents, which is a range of 50
Yeah.
different, and
Right.
so all these different CAS
It's
numbers.
because someone didn't want to break it down, or they had no way of breaking it down.
Or they
so
just wrote the number down wrong, whatever, but it was verbatim transferred into the list, and once it's on that list, it's there for perpetuity.
And part of the problem is that you take a product like naphtha, who is reported because it has a flash point,
Right.
and you have to report everything that has a flash point under 140. Well, naphtha can have maybe 5 or 6 or 7 different CAS numbers, all with flash points under 140, but they show up with a different CAS number. So once that CAS number is reported, then it's incorporated into the list automatically. I mean, it's just,
And irrevocably.
yeah, it's just a mess.
Onto the list of this law.
Yes.
Based on the flashpoint.
Yes.
And if I can.
And other people's misidentification that must be reportable, so let's put it in.
If I can relate this to my own experience some years ago with the fire marshal's report, I mean,
believe my instruction was, it has an MSDS put in there. You know, I mean, I was like putting in sand
Yep.
and stuff, which is, and so is that the fire marshal's requirement?
Still is, yeah.
It still is. If it has an MSDS, do it.
So that begs the question, so if I hear you guys, you gentlemen correctly, you're saying that if something was inaccurately reported in the past, that ends up becoming an artifact
Automatic, yeah.
in the database.
Right.
It would seem like there should be some checking to remove
Glenn
that.
never reviewed the chemicals came in. To assume people, it was right, and it wasn't after the fact. I said, what is this doing in here? And called out like 11 of them and said, you need to scratch these out, they don't even exist, they're bogus.
Mhm.
And I think that got done once.
Up until this year, anything that the public put in showed up as a different color when you called it up. This year, everything showed up black and white, whereas.
Because we're now in our 15th year, Tom, the
Yeah.
things are locked on.
If you're saying butane is not,
Many of the gases aren't, you won't find isobutane.
and yet, even though they probably
Well,
pretty
but see, now,
volatile, I mean, there are
let's
some
back
health
up.
issues.
The reason these gases got put on was they were perceived as being characteristically flammable, and many of them burn. But the problem is the definition of an ignitable substance in the EPA rules is applied to a liquid with a flash point below 140. Well, gases don't have a flash point because they're not a liquid.
Yeah, there are gases.
And so, but people took all these flammable gases and propane and butane and all these others and said, well, that must be, and the only exclusion was like forklifts because that's not manufacturing, that's for other uses of the company. So we don't report, the propane in forklifts, but now we're saying report acetylene. And neither one of them meet the definition of a flash point and aren't characteristically
A
ignitable.
flash point is defined as a Penske-Martin flash point. And a Penske-Martin is a device in which you pour the liquid and you heat it up. And as you heat it up, you measure the temperature and you are constantly having an ignition. And once that Penske-Martin flash occurs, you record the temperature. You can't run a Penske-Martin flash cup on a gas. Period.
Is the use of a flash point to describe which gases are to be reported, is that part of the toxics?
It's just ignitability in terms of solvents, in terms of whether they flash. But diesel is combustible, gasoline is flammable, or another term would be ignitable.
I mean,
And 140 flash points that usually does.
I'm not sure that I see a direct correlation between the flash point and the potential health hazard.
One would agree. Why do we report oxygen? If it gets out, is that going to do any
I
harm?
mean, we're looking at some more complicated chemicals that don't break down, bond with other chemicals that are a more greater health hazard, and maybe have to have a lower flash
It
point.
was an effort to
I mean, a
capture
higher
all of
one.
these, it was an effort to capture all of the potential, possible, everything that you could capture in this universe. So they've taken about 6 or 8 different federal lists. They took CERCLA, they took SARE, they took RCRA, they took, and they combined all these lists together. And they said, this will give us a good database for which we can define toxic materials. Oh, and by the way, we are going to incorporate a little statement that says, if it has to be disposed of at a hazardous waste fill, we're going to use those rules also to define. I mean, it got out of hand, and there was no common sense.
So
So I'm coming
you're
back to the
saying,
day
you're sort of
after-
saying that not only with the metals issue, that things that are not excluded by the nature of this charter amendment, the implementation of this, like a list of gases, needs work.
Yes.
Because
And the other part is, what if you look at those who are still reporting, it's not consistent. Some do, some don't.
Right, so practically, to address this, how about a list of these bogus cast numbers and compounds that you think are outside of the purview? And then let's compare that against the charter and what the list, I mean, somewhere you have to do a comparison, right? What you're telling me is that historically, anything that was thrown in there got reported and it lies in there as an artifact. So if that's the case, then it would seem like.
Which isn't a problem, I just know that that's deadwood that's in there.
Right, but if it's outside of the lists that were stated in the charter, then really that should be cleaned up. I mean,
Well, I've
databases
tested
take-
many times with Glenn to do that, and
Right.
here we are.
Okay, well,
Yeah.
how about
But the gases would be a huge one just in itself.
how about a list of those gases and those compounds that?
Just take any gases right now, period, gases, period. I don't need to give you a list, just anything's a gas, is reported.
I'm
So you're,
really against,
you're wanting the gases
Take it out, they don't belong.
taken out. Okay.
Yeah.
well,
They weren't part of the original language, and they don't fit the definition of Flashpoint.
I don't think I would work
the
it.
flashpoint is not in the ordinance.
Oh, yes it is, that's the definition of ignitability.
I know.
When you look at the-
In this
Yes,
toxic.
yeah, when you look at ignite, it's toxicity, reactivity, ignitability, corrosivity. Those are the four characteristics that comes out of RIPA rule, and ignitability is strictly driven by a flashpoint at 140. Period.
For the-
Corrosivity is below 2, above 12. I don't know the toxicity for the pesticides,
Well,
22 of them, and metals.
yeah, I'm trying to relate it to health, potential health.
Yeah, so-
Not necessarily gas, may not be the gas itself, but maybe it's ability to carry other toxic substances with it in case of a fire or a manufacturing process.
Yeah, but if it's not written in that way, then it's,
Yeah, well.
But it seems like a fairly straightforward direction to Joe to examine the issue of gases on the list as opposed to the charter's list of toxic compounds, right?
And where that goes is, let everybody do the same thing.
Right, that's exactly what I'm saying. So it's, the first step would be having Joe verify, because I mean, I don't know the list, and if we know that the gases aren't on the list, then we can make a decision.
Okay, just
Maybe-
got some research to do. I'm hearing that most of us favor it.
and I'm happy to clean things up and help them make sense, because that's my own personal goal anyway.
And if we get to the point where, you know, it's clearly not part of the purview of the program to report gases, then there's an educational effort that needs to go. And really, it seems like in the online entry, that those then shouldn't be actual choices. Right, so then you could fairly easily programmatically prevent that.
They weren't in there originally, they were only added subsequently when manufactured.
I hear what you're saying, yes,
Exactly.
I totally understand what you're saying, right, yep. So,
That's how we got here.
so yeah, and I think cleaning that up is about the integrity of the data, which is, goes right to what Steve was talking about, this is a reporting program, so I'm
Maybe-
totally in favor of that.
Maybe a step after that, as a result of us going through this, which will obviously take a while, because it's a lot of research to do. Has anybody else, other than us two, read the reporting instructions, or how you figure out what you report for this? I mean, because it's a pretty thick packet, and makes absolutely no sense, other than you guys.
Andy does it for us.
Maybe. I think this is a big part, because I think you and I had some correspondence on this, what you were mentioning, you know, the ignitability characteristic as to waste, you know, qualifies as regular waste, you know, whether it's on site or blah, 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 if you disposed of it. I must have had 10 emails to Joe going, what exactly is this intention here? I'm a little confused. And he straightened me out on it, but I think little areas like that, this directly corresponds to that. What we use as reporters to guide us, because if things are open to interpretation, and that's what we're putting on the website, you know, here or there, because we're able to report it, there's probably a lot of different interpretations in other areas. And we're backwards from that.
From my experience, I would say no one is doing the same thing.
I would agree.
Okay, so you got, how many companies reporting on doing 30?
29 this year.
So you got 29 different ways of looking at it.
I would say one of the first places that you could start is with the last book that was printed that gave the list both in alphabetical and in CAS order. You could go through those 1,800 chemicals, and if it wasn't referenced on the far right-hand side where the federal list came from, if there was no reference there, you could delete that chemical. That would be the first place to start.
And actually, that would be Joe, that's where the database people should actually, they should be able to run a query and actually
clean up
There
that
should
column.
be,
Yeah.
right, there should be an original table which has the references that you're referring to, and then just run that against every compound that's in the database, and where there is not a match, those are the, and if we had that list to look at, then this discussion would become very concrete. You could sit right and look at, okay, these are compounds that either they're inaccurately or they don't fit into the criteria of the report. That would seem like a good thing to
Well,
pursue.
if this central aspect of the gases is the flammability, the test use, does gasoline qualify?
It's a liquid, yes.
It doesn't have,
It's a liquid, and it has ignitability below 140.
And so does, say, starting fluid,
Or
gas,
gas.
yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Ethers,
Has anybody reported any gasoline on our reports?
no, because it's not part of manufacturing.
It's not used in manufacturing.
That's what
But
I'm
it's
saying.
used in a manufacturing plant, but it's not part of manufacturing.
So are hundreds of other chemicals for cleaning and other things that are not part of manufacturing is not included in the process.
They're only including the parts of the manufacturing.
That's the original language.
Gets back to
Ready?
the, yeah, the language.
No, I'm not making it up. It's the way it's etched in stone.
The cleaning chemicals used in.
So custodial supplies, not account.
Well, I mean, some manufacturing processes need specific cleaning chemicals.
Yeah.
Because of the nature of the manufacturing. Are you saying those are excluded?
Yeah. Does Nancy's yogurt report sodium hydroxide?
I couldn't tell you.
Yeah. See, but then, an example would be that they're a dairy, they use that for cleaning, not for manufacturing. So they may not be reporting a corrosive, which others would be.
Then they wouldn't have to.
Right.
Yeah, let's move on. We have some view of what.
Something like that, yeah, yeah. Is it tough for any pages?
Because I keep feeling like I'm missing something.
Yeah.
I got a copy. It's my only one too, like, now.
Finally, cool.
I'm gonna sell mine on eBay.
Yeah, big market.
Okay, well, let's, we had 5 minutes on staff report. It seems like we've also covered a lot of the next meeting discussion too, but can we wrap this up and go on to the next? You want a final comment?
Yeah, I just want to ask, because this is something that's been bothering me. I think we bring it up, Shan, the tracking instructions. I mean, I would like to sit through with a couple of board members and just kind of go through to see if it does make sense. Because, I mean, it kind of does, but I don't know, I really think it can use some cleaning up.
When you
But-
say tracking instructions, are you talking about instructions to the manufacturers about how to report?
Yes,
Right.
yes. And I think it was 2007 or something, was the last time it was supposedly updated. And I think it's probably a little bit past time for us to take a quick review. And I don't know if we want to spend entire toxics board meeting like reviewing that together, but if we could just get a small group.
You have that in a digital form that you can forward to us? or-
I do.
Yeah, it seems like that should be something we should all have.
Okay.
All right, anything, to wrap up the staff report discussion? And let's go on to the update on the status of the 2012 reports. So, from Joe.
Okay, so did everybody see the memo I sent out about reporting? We were not as successful this year at getting everybody to report by the deadline, but there's two businesses, A&K Development and Oregon Ice Cream, have asked for a 1-week extension, which the board has given me authorization to give a 1-week extension, which I did. At A&K Development, this year we have a new staff person. It's the person that replaced reporting duties for David Beatty. Most of you will remember him. And she somehow misunderstood the due date to be the end of April instead of the beginning of April. And then on top of that, the purchasing manager, who she gets primarily most of her information from, left the company probably at the worst opportune time. So it just was pretty much impossible for her to get her reporting on time. plan is to get it done by the end of day tomorrow, which will be the new extended deadline. And then for Oregon Ice Cream, he's also having difficulty getting the information he needs from his vendors to complete his report. And they actually have a lot of stuff to report on, so I felt that was a reasonable request from both of those companies. So I will keep you posted, whether or not they meet the extended deadline, but I'm assuming that they will. And if that happens, this year, again, we will not have to discuss extensions or decide whether or not to take action on possible fines. So, but everybody else, 29 out of the 31 companies that are required to report did, and all of those are now posted on the Toxics website, including the city's voluntary reporting on chlorine in swimming pools and pesticides used at the airport and public wastewater. And one huge benefit, besides that it saves me 2 days staff time on transporting the data around and getting it in the right format to get on the website, with the new data, internet-based data entry program, as soon as a company submits me their report and I click on approve, it is immediately posted on the website. So that's huge improvement.
When you mentioned public works, you mentioned airport and wastewater. Pesticides? Those are the two parts of public works you mentioned that
and
are
parks
reported.
and space.
And parks and open space?
Yes.
Okay, that's the
Sorry,
biggest
I
one.
forgot.
Yeah, that's- yeah.
They're gonna make it. Yes.
Okay.
Okay. So all those are posted on the website. And then the next step is, once everybody submits their reports, is I print out a big, huge paper copy and submit it to the library, so it's accessible there for people who don't have access to computers. Anybody have any questions?
Have you received any questions?
It seems like printing a paper copy in this day and age is absurd.
Yes.
Have you
Is that part of it, it's in the charter?
At the library.
It's just where there are computers to access.
Anyway.
It's absurd. but Anyway.
Have you received any inquiries from the public other than, or Toxics?
No, I have not.
Are there any other questions about the status of our?
I'm curious thing, yeah. Have we ever gone to the library and asked if anybody's ever used the computers there
Use the
to
computer.
access the toxics?
Oh,
Has anybody ever gone to the library to access the toxics as it was designed to?
well, I know people have access to hard copy. I don't know if they've used.
You wouldn't want to wait for a computer at the library.
Oh, there's barriers, okay.
Well, that's the worst place to go for a computer, in my experience. Well, not for the carbon catalog, but I think for, this is a dedicated computer to just city. I mean, like, if you wanted to use the internet, you wouldn't go to the Eugene Public Library unless you wanted to wait.
Oh, right, yes, there's a long way.
You would go to other cities or something. That's not my experience of Eugene. Anything else with the status of our reports?
Nope.
Okay. An update on the membership process, which the recruiting for the terms, which all are around June. So you're going to tell
Yes.
us who's on for how long?
So position 3, our newest member, Rick Nickel, and position 6, Randy's terms are up June 30th. And there's a citywide recruitment process going on to fill all upcoming vacancies, boards and commissions. And I'm pleased to report that we received applications from both members of the Toxics Board, and those are the only 2 applications we've received. So the next step is May 1st and 2nd, the City Council has interviews scheduled for the candidates. And which day they're going to be interviewing you, I don't know at this point. But what typically has happened is the Toxics Board makes a recommendation to City Council. And so I'd like to open open the discussion for the toxic board to decide if they feel a need to interview the reapplying candidates, or if they wanted to make a recommendation that I could prepare to submit to council on their behalf.
Recommendation.
Sounds fine. Okay, so we got a proposal, motion to recommendation and a second. Discussion on that. You for both? Did you say recommendation?
Yes.
Yes, for both applicants? Okay. Any discussion on that proposal? Okay, all those in favor of the toxic board recommending to the council the applicants, Rick and myself, say aye. Aye. Opposed? Okay.
I will send that forward. The only other item I have there is that chair rotation also happens on July 1st. So Randy will step down as chair, and Tom will step up as chair, and Stephen will move back into the vice chair slot, just because we've had more quickly than usual. We've had just a huge quick turnover on toxic board members. And then on the same note, I did send out an updated copy of the toxic board roster. Did anybody have any updates? I didn't receive any emails.
So we have two applicants today.
Yes, Christine and Allison. So I'm wondering if Christine had her baby, but she didn't let me know.
Some not here today?
Yeah.
Yes, there's two members, the other two advocacy members, Allison Guzman and Christine Zelikoff.
Okay, if there are no further questions on the membership issues, we'll take an action there to recommend that those apply. No other questions. We'll go on to the last, which is item on the agenda, which is to schedule our next meeting, and also put out some suggestions for what we should be talking about. Let me ask first, what work, we've kind of gone through our annual cycle of required activities at this time, right?
Yes.
So customarily,
The only outstanding item is invoices, which went out yesterday, are due by May 1st. So if somebody pays late, which I'm not anticipating that happening, we'll again need to discuss extensions and or possible fines if that situation arises.
now the fee schedule has been presented to the council, or will be
Oh,
shortly.
it has been, and it was accepted
It was accepted.
as recommended by
That
the
was
toxics
between
board.
the last meeting and this one.
Yes, I apologize.
Okay. And the issues that have come up here on, I know what the question was. Our last meeting, we discussed changes to the website, which are sort of pending the reconstruction or
The launch of the new
yeah.
website, yeah.
So the things that we decided would be a good idea are waiting
Yes.
until that happens. And we might want to look and see if it looks like we got what we were hoping for.
Yep.
So when would that be?
Probably just planning for it not launching as scheduled, probably mid-June, early July.
I see. So that's a little bit down the road. Well, so we got these issues that have been raised about cleaning up the ordinance. That was something we might work on before then with metals, gases. Emergency planning committee, that was said, well, there's no hurry on that. Does anybody know more about that? We should have a discussion with that group or representative from that group.
Well, we can have the main coordinator come make a presentation anytime.
I see.
I mean, we're still getting the committee up and running.
You're on the committee?
Yes.
And the committee is composed
Of some representatives from businesses that are in the toxics program, to bring everybody into, one space to plan for, hazardous materials releases.
So is the emergency management program,
Yep.
so Joe or Izzy is on it?
Joe Rizzi and his staff person, Stacy Burr,
Stacy, yeah,
are the leads on it.
okay. They're the leads on the committee?
Yep.
Is the county represented?
The county has come a couple of times, yes, Linda Cook, emergency manager.
So they would explain how the information that is collected in the reports is or is not of value in emergency planning in this area of chemical emergencies?
Well, I think she would just make a presentation on, what our goals are, eventually.
Who is she?
Stacy.
Oh, Stacy.
Stacy Burr. She
Okay.
would make the presentation, as the lessee, but, we only
Lessee?
met like 5 times, so.
What's the lessee?
Oh, I'm sorry, the Lane County
Oh,
Emergency.
okay.
It's the.
All right.
It sounds like it's still a little early, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
How many meetings have there been?
We've only had about 5 over the last couple of years, and we're still recruiting to get more of a broader group in the room to actually dig in and do our work.
You might want the group that I, the action plan team, reorganized the neighborhood disaster preparedness groups, and ham radio operators. It's the earthquake, unleashing toxic support spills, all kinds of that.
Okay.
When communications are down. Okay, so we've got these items mentioned. I don't know if there's anything else. There are proposals for what month we should have a meeting in?
Well, at last meeting, we also talked about figuring out a way to identify if all of the businesses that should be in the program are actually reporting under the program.
That's sort of an audit of whether the reporters are all reporting, as opposed to an audit on the contents of the report, which is now
Just another
that.
item, yes.
And so,
So I was thinking that if, unless we have action items in terms of people not reporting or not paying, that it seemed like it would be best if we kind of got feedback from you on the metals issue and then the gas issue before we met again. So we got that back from you first before we met again. So what I was thinking is maybe it would be premature to set a date until we get some of that information, or whether or not we need to meet in the short term in terms of any actionable items.
should we look at an approximate month that we're expecting, like June or July, or I think you're saying that May is not, to be presumed that we would need a meeting in May? Probably not. Seems too soon.
I don't know if I could get it
Yeah,
together.
Yeah, and then essentially summer's here, and so it could very well be fall before we actually have to meet again. So,
Okay.
I don't know, I'm just thinking that it might be, rather than setting something premature, just let Joe contact us.
And you said that the website changes could be manifest by July?
The initial round, yes. Absolutely. So August would be a great target month. Most potentially scheduled next week.
Okay, I mean, when are they saying they'll have this website up?
The website's supposed to launch June 1st, but,
Nothing
it's a
happens.
huge project, and usually things don't go off without a hitch, especially with that. So I'm just going to anticipate
Okay.
somewhat of a delay, so
All right.
maybe
So, last half
early
of July.
July, but that's middle of
Okay.
summer.
Well, August is too.
Well, I mean, it doesn't have to be August, I'm
Okay.
just saying, I could probably be fully prepared with all of my information.
That sounds like a good timeline,
Yeah,
just to
okay.
keep in our minds,
That's
it's not
the-
really set.
That's the first thing that'll happen. I would like to respond, fairly quickly, like not 2 months later, if the website doesn't look at all, like we want it to.
Well, it'll be really easy to change.
Yeah, well, we should have so we should have a meeting within a few weeks or a month or something after it's put up, which would be July or August. All right, so everybody's kind of, sound okay?
I'll get my information together and then I'll send out a Google poll of some possible dates. Does everybody know what Google poll means?
Could you just call people and ask them?
And I can do that too.
Okay, or email or something. Is there any other business that needs to come up? If not, we're adjourned. Thanks, everybody.